Hey everyone, welcome back to the Majesty of Reason. I'm Joe Schmid, and today I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Moon to discuss skepticism and the epistemology of, well, skepticism and how we know things, whether there's an external world, how I know that my senses are reliable, and things of that kind. So Andrew, thank you for coming on. And can you give us maybe like a 30-second introduction to who you are and what you do?
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on. My name's Andrew Moon. I am a philosophy professor at Virginia Commonwealth University at VCU, which is in Richmond. I think I'm in my fourth year here. Time flies. I focus on epistemology, which studies the nature of knowledge and rational belief. And so skepticism is one of the topics I'm interested in. It's not my major research focus, although I have written one paper on the relationship between skepticism and memory. So that's a little bit about me.
Sweet. And so, we've got a really fun discussion coming in. We actually have slides presented. So if you want to get into those, you can click share screen.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right. All right. So let's get this going. So one thing about skepticism is a lot of people, especially your viewers who have, probably know something about philosophy, they know a little bit about skepticism, and even in the pop culture, people know about just questions like, what if we're a brain in a vat, or what if we're in the Matrix? But it's left as a question, but not as a seriously defended view, where we actually support it with premises and an argument. So I think the main thing I'm hoping to do in this presentation is just introduce your viewers to some of the main arguments for skepticism. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to skim the surface. So I guess that's that. I guess I'll move on to the next slide. Whoops, okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So there's so much to say. I teach epistemology classes, and that first book I have in the bibliography. So what I want to do right now is just let you audience know some recommendations and some of the sources I used for this. This book by Richard Feldman called Epistemology. I think it's a superb introduction to epistemology. It's what I use when I teach my course, and really a lot of what I'm presenting today and going to be talking with Joe about is just a few of my classes on skepticism kind of truncated into this and into a discussion. I also just read through for fun. There's this other introduction to epistemology by Matthew McGrath and Alvin Goldman. McGrath was a reader for my dissertation. Is an excellent epistemologist, and he wrote the chapter on skepticism in this book. So I use that some. And another book I reference, I appeal to, is this book by Bergmann and Synod Armstrong. It's just an introduction to informal logic. And lastly, I forgot to send you to this, Joe, in the slide, but this book by Kevin McCain called Evidentialism and Epistemic Justification. And I think it has one of the most thorough and well-defended responses to skepticism using inference to the best explanation. So we'll be talking about that later. But I just wanted to give people some recommendations at the start. And also in scholarship, we hear a lot about giving credit where it's due and citing our sources. So it's not like the stuff I'm giving you, most of it's not stuff I came up with my own. That's everybody stands on many giants. So. Okay, I guess I should keep going on, unless there's questions, but I guess not. Okay, so I'll keep going. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is talk about the extent of our skepticism. Okay, and this is how Feldman, in the main book I'm recommending for if people wanted to look into epistemology more. But what I'm saying right now is a common distinction, which is you want to say how much knowledge you're saying people do not have. Okay, so typically called global skepticism is the claim that no one knows anything at all, like zilch, nothing. That's global skepticism. Local skepticism is much more limited. No one knows anything in certain areas, topics, or domains. Okay, so now some people are so it's good to like just point out the varying levels of skepticism someone might have and where they might be skeptics. So few people in like the actual world are skeptics about our own minds or the external world or even the past or the limited past. But a number of people will be skeptics about religion, for example. They'll say, like, whether or not there's a God, that's not something we can know, or whether there's an afterlife. So they might just be a skeptic about religion. Other people might want to add to religion ethical truths. So they'll say, yeah, we can't know anything about religion. We also can't know anything in ethics. Um, and then some people might even want to add more. So some people, for a certain period of time, had a lot of skepticism about our knowledge about math and a priori knowledge. Some people, I noticed this in, I was just talking with non-philosophers. Some people are skeptics about the future. They'll say, well, you never know what's going to happen next. Like nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. So those are just varying degrees of skepticism that we could talk about.
Yeah, and
Okay.
some challenges. No, I was just going to add that some challenges that face local skepticisms that I found oftentimes in the literature is that oftentimes your skepticism can kind of bleed into other areas, and like local skepticism start bleeding into other ones until you get more and more non-local. And so, that's one of the criticisms of, for instance, skeptical theism, where if you are, if you're taking a stance on which, our cognitive capacities are limited in certain respects,
Good.
such that we can have a very limited amount of knowledge about what God would do and God's desires and reasons for acting and so on.
Right.
Other people have argued that might lead into more skepticism about, for instance, our moral knowledge and other sorts of things, and even natural theological arguments like the fine-tuning argument and other sorts of things. So that's just one worry that I wanted to add and get on people's radar. Like when you're thinking about local skepticisms, they actually kind of tend to have a tendency to like bleed into other areas.
Yeah, I think that's right. Sometimes people really want to restrict their skepticism to certain domains, and it ends up being hard to do sometimes, like to keep it from bleeding to like all of our knowledge. Some people have claimed even skeptical theism, as you mentioned, should make us skeptical about like knowledge of the physical world and so forth, which seems to be a bit much, but what we need then is maybe good criteria for knowledge. This is where theory of knowledge, epistemology, comes in, where we can kind of bracket out, the stuff we can know from the stuff we can't know. So, okay, good. Next slide then, I guess. All right, so I guess you said I had the power over the slides, but I still want to like ask you if it's okay, I guess, since you're the host. So this is what I'll call the modal. These are some distinctions Feldman makes that I'm presenting things in my own way, actually. I'm just going to put in terms of modal strength. I know on your channel, modal stuff is talked about a lot. Okay, so now I define skepticism in the previous slide as just saying nobody does know anything, which is kind of just like a contingent claim about the actual world. But skeptics typically want to say something a little more stronger. Okay. And so here's varying degrees of strength that we can make the modality of our claim to lack of knowledge. We could say knowledge is metaphysically impossible. So that means not only do we not know, but we can't know. And the idea of us knowing something is like the idea of a square circle. Like it's just like broadly logically impossible, metaphysically impossible. I mean, your viewers will know this type of language since you do some much metaphysics. Number two is a little bit weaker. It's not saying that knowledge is like a square circle, but it's just saying, given how humans, how we are, nobody is able to know things. So none of us can, travel faster than the speed of light, or none of us can, jump over a building or shoot lasers out of our eyes. I mean, these things are metaphysically possible, but none of us has the ability to do it, and that's number two. So that's a weaker skeptical claim. It's saying, yeah, we could in principle, but just nobody's able to, given our abilities. And then number three is just nobody actually does know anything in the actual world. So those are like varying strengths of abilities and, very modal strengths in terms of our skeptical claim. Now, Feldman says, and I agree with him, that epistemologists are typically interested in number two. So number 3 is a little bit too weak, just to say, oh, just we happen to not know, but just wait a little bit longer, maybe we will. But we're not saying something so strong as saying that like something about the idea of knowledge is like contradictory, like a square circle. So it's something more like in number 2. Okay, so gonna move on. Okay, as soon as somebody, okay, so I want to sum up what we just did, which is we were clarifying the claim of what skepticism says. And I think this is good because, again, in pop culture, when people talk about skepticism, they normally think of it as more like a question, like how do we know, or can we know anything? Skeptics make a stronger claim. They'll either say we don't have the ability to know anything at all, or we can't or don't have the ability to know something in a specific domain. So that's a proposition. And so as a proposition, it's something that's subject to arguments for and against. And so that's what we're going over. And I think that takes us immediately farther than pop culture discussions of skepticism, where they just leave a movie and go, oh, I wonder if we're a brain in a vat or we're in the Matrix. And that's where we're left. Okay, now, this typically happens in like intro classes. Smart epistemology students see this right away. And even like smart professional philosophers want to push this sort of line too, which is the idea that something about skepticism is self-refuting or self-defeating. Okay. Let's see. So I hope that everybody can see. I had to move us around to be able to see all the slide. So here's 2 ways. So here I'm drawing from Feldman, 2 ways the skeptic might be self-refuting. Skeptic might say, I know that we don't know anything. Or they might even just say, we don't know anything. And then put them, like by saying it, they're kind of putting themselves, like acting as if they're in a position to know that by asserting the claim. That's number 1. Number 2 is, in daily life, skeptics tend to act like they know things. So they're like, hey, you stole my whatever. And like, well, do you know that? And, like they'll use knowledge talk and they'll act as if, when they go outside, they act as if they know that they're not going to just like start floating in the air. They know that the umbrella is going to keep the rain out and so forth. Okay, so one thing people will immediately say to the skeptic is, come on, your life is not livable. You're like, first of all, you can't even claim your view without self-refutation, and you can't live out your view. Okay, so that's 2 claims to self-refutation. Here's the standard Moreian response, going back to G.E. Moore, the great philosopher, early 1900s. He would say, like, for any skeptical argument you give, we're more certain that we know stuff, we have knowledge, than whatever the skeptic's premises are. So this is a very standard move. It's people in philosophy of religion will talk about like Moreian shifts. Okay, so that's also another quick response to whatever skeptical argument we're going to be giving in the future slides, which is, come on, we know that we have hands, so something must be wrong with your argument. Okay, so here's some quick responses. First, I think the skeptic, at least with respect to what they're claiming or how they're acting, is they can explain their behavior by appeal to their beliefs. Okay, and they can just say, yeah, I don't know it, but I believe the truck might hit me, and that's why I'm running away or like trying to avoid it. I believe that umbrellas will, protect me from rain. That's why I'm bringing an umbrella. But I don't claim to know that, and so they could just claim that they have beliefs but not knowledge. When I first met Richard Frumerton, he's a epistemologist at University of Iowa, and I would say a skeptic. I really wanted to know if he really didn't think we had any justified beliefs. So like I saw him, I met him, we like shook hands, and being the awkward, excited grad student I said, do you really think, I should have like said, how was your day or something. I just went right and he's like, do you really think we're not justified in believing there's a table? And I mean, he didn't flinch, I guess. He was just, no, I don't think I'm justified in believing there's a table. I believe there's a table, but I don't think I'm justified in believing there's a table. I wouldn't claim to know. And I was like, oh, this guy's serious. So that's response number 1. Response number 2 is, there's some goals we might have as we're entering this discussion. One is like, I take the goal isn't just to beat the skeptic. So suppose we were right. that, the skeptic, haha, we gotcha, you contradicted yourself, haha, like, nah, 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 but I don't think the goal is just to beat the skeptic. So there might be a dialectical goal, and maybe we successfully we tripped up the skeptic on his feet. He's hoist with his own petard. But there's more that we care about as inquirers and epistemologists. For example, Feldman points out there's the goal of diagnosis. Even if we can trip up the skeptic, that doesn't tell us exactly where the skeptical arguments go wrong, the arguments that are going to be coming up. We want to know where they go wrong. Like, why do they fail? Why do the intuitions that support the premise? Like, what's wrong with those intuitions? Why do we feel them so strongly? So we have a goal of diagnosis. And then Matt McGrath in the other text that I mentioned, like as humans and as philosophers, we care about building up an epistemology, and answering the skeptic is really important for that. Some philosophers have pointed out that even if there were no living skeptics, like there was no human skeptic that ever lived, it would be valuable to like invent the skeptic and invent these arguments so that we could develop our epistemology and develop our theories for how we know things. Okay, so I went on for a while. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of things that I want to dwell on.
All right, let's talk about it.
Okay, so the first thing is, so I'm quite sympathetic, to be honest, with the Morean shift and the Morean response here. Some people, when I articulate it, well, I don't know, I just wanted to dwell on it for the audience more, just to see how significant it is and why it is not, it's not as implausible as they might think. How I understand it is essentially the Morean shift or the Morean response is looking at things in terms of comparing More's argument and comparing the skeptic's argument, right? So the skeptic has a variety of premises, P1 through Pn, and a conclusion C. And that conclusion is either that, I don't know that there's an external world, or perhaps as a consequence of that, I don't know that I have hands. And they've got these highfalutin philosophical premises to show that, maybe like some kind of epistemic closure principle or some other sort of thing, or like certainty or infallibilism or some other kind of, tricky philosophical premises that get you to that conclusion or something along those lines. Yeah. So that's the skeptic argument. And then we just go on the other side and we look at this other argument with two premises and a conclusion. Premise one, I know that I have hands. Premise two, if I know that I have hands, then I know that there's an external world. And then, so if I know that there's an external world, then something must be wrong with their argument or something along those lines, right? So you just compare these two arguments and you just ask yourself, like, which one are you more confident in, right? Or which one strikes you as more plausible? Does it strike you as more plausible that the entire conjunction of all of those skeptical premises are true, some of which are like, kind of philosophical claims and other sorts of things? Does it strike you as more plausible that the entire conjunction of those is true? Or does it just strike you as more plausible that you know that you have hands or something along those lines? And More is like, it's just obvious that it strikes me as more plausible that I have hands. And so you could just, one person's modus ponens is another person's modus tollens. So then you simply affirm that, hey, I do in fact know that I have hands. And so somewhere or other, your argument went wrong. And it's a kind of comparison of plausibility. I see people say that, like, oh, well, that's just question begging. The very question at issue in this dialectical context is whether or not you do in fact know that you have hands. And so to merely stomp your foot and say that you know that you have hands is to beg the question. And I'm just thinking, like, well, if you're doing this kind of comparative analysis such that the skeptic has a modus ponens argument and I have a modus tollens argument, and we're just comparing the plausibility of the premises, I mean, I'm just confessing to you that no, this is more plausible. It's not like I'm foot stomping and begging the question. I'm just doing a Morean shift. I'm just doing a modus tollens here, So I don't know. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, I'll probably agree. And I'll also probably still say, we still have this goal of diagnosis, finding exactly where the argument goes wrong.
Yeah.
And the goal of building epistemology. I'd say that. But just to play around a little bit, I wonder why. So let me say where I agree first. When I first got to grad school, my professor at the time, Jonathan Quanvig, he's an epistemologist, he gave this quote, which was, never let the less obvious overturn the more obvious. And I like that, which is basically what we're saying. I guess one concern I have, so I'm just going to raise this question to you, is why should we trust this degree of confidence as like being the indicator of which proposition we should keep and which one we should let go of? So it's more of a question. Yeah, so you are more sure that you know you have hands than these highfalutin premises. So we got that, but Why trust that sense of confidence? Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing to say there is like, I feel like I don't know if this is a pragmatic argument or maybe it's a dialectical argument, but it's like the skeptic themselves, in leveling their premises, they're going to want to say that, listen, these premises themselves, their truth is more plausible than their negation, and that's precisely why we accept it. So it's like the skeptic themselves is using this, and so, if they're entitled to use it to try to derive that there is no external world, well then, by kind of symmetry or parity, I can use that kind of principle as well, and I can rely on it, and then I can kind of use their own, I don't know, use their own toolkit against them, as it were. So it seems to me that any kind of argument in uh, any dialectical context is going to have to use or rely on something like that, like let the clear be the guide to the unclear, or something along those lines, or yeah, something along those lines. So it's not really, I haven't really justified it. I've just pointed to a kind of dialectical, like, hey,
yeah,
we're both in this boat together. So I guess maybe like ultimately at the end of the day, or um, it's almost like, how do you justify the reliability of your reasoning itself? And it's like, oh no, I can't reason to, like, because then I'm presupposing the very thing that I'm trying to justify. So it's like you're completely stuck. And I just, yeah, what do you think?
yeah. I actually think as we dig into the arguments, we might be able to glean some insight.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like, yeah, as you said, the inference is best explanation, those other sorts of things.
Uh,
And, phenomenal conservatism, you can appeal to all these other sorts of things. But I guess if I'm in the dialectical context where the skeptic is giving me an argument, I would just point out that you're making use of this too, buddy. So I can use it too, and that's I see it as a kind of dialectical move. I think it's precisely when the skeptic is offering an argument that you can do this. I think because the Morean shift is precisely taking a modus ponens argument, namely the conjunction of the premises entails a conclusion. Then you affirm the conjunction of the premises, modus ponens, you get the conclusion, and you could just flip that on its head, do the modus tollens. So you deny the conclusion, agree that the premises entail the conclusion, and thereby infer the negation of the disjuncts, right? Each of the negations of the disjuncts. So either this one's false, or that one's false, or that one's false, and so on.
right,
So.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think we will get more insight as we go into the specific arguments on how the sort of move you're imagining could work. One thing I also would think about though is just sometimes I think it's better to think of these arguments as just like abstract objects, or like just sets of propositions that exist independent of there being an actual skeptic person.
Mm,
Helps us like
interesting.
forget about the dialectic and pointing, well, you did this, so why can't I do this? Like, it's more of like, oh, here's this argument. What do I say? Like existing in Plato's heaven or something like that.
Yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind. So that's the first thing that I wanted to go over. I still have some other things that I want
Oh,
to talk
okay,
about on this
sure, go
slide.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
the second
yeah,
thing is that you pointed out to this kind of acting as if. Some people say, well, hold on, a skeptic, like you are acting as if you have all this
right,
sort of knowledge, and
good.
I'm wondering if. I mean, this might bleed into the inference of the best explanation, but it might be different. I'm wondering if you can kind of run like a no miracles kind of argument along these lines. So for listeners, the no miracles argument comes up in the philosophy of science when you're talking about scientific realism, like whether or not we should believe that our best mature scientific theories are at least approximately true, that they accurately describe reality to at least a large extent. And so the scientific realist is going to want to say, yeah, our scientific theories are approximately true, or at least our best ones, the most sophisticated ones that are evidentially confirmed, and so on. And they're also going to want to say oftentimes that the entities postulated in those theories, we have good reason to believe in them, and so on. And one of the principal arguments for scientific realism is what's called the no miracles argument. And the essential line is like, while scientific realism is the only philosophy of science, it's the only account of scientific theories and so on that doesn't make the success of science a miracle. Like it doesn't just make it utterly mysterious and inexplicable and just this chance occurrence. It's precisely because our scientific theories are at least approximately true that they are successful, that they can have this technological success, they can have success in predictions, that they can have success in retrodictions, that they can have success in making our lives better, and so on. All this sorts of technological, predictive, explanatory success. And really the inference is that if these things weren't true, if they weren't latching onto something in reality, then it would just be it'd be total miracle if they turned out to be completely successful. Or I guess rather, if they are successful, it'd be a miracle if they weren't true. You can kind of put it either way. But so I'm wondering if we can kind of run a similar argument here. Like it would just be like, I guess realism, external world realism is the only epistemology that doesn't make the success of acting as if a miracle, right? So like, it's precisely because our acting as if helps us get along in the world and keeps me alive and other sorts of things, that I can infer that at least a lot of these beliefs are at least approximately true. Because if they weren't, then it would seem to be just a miracle. It'd be like a coincidence of cosmic proportions. It'd be inexplicable. It'd be mysterious as to how I am indeed able to get around and succeed in life, I guess. So I'm wondering if what you think about that.
Yeah. This really is bleeding into the inference of the best explanation argument.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if we should just reserve that.
We can. I mean, I do think it has some differences because, like, you can put it in like Bayesian terms, like what would we expect under a given hypothesis, like what would we expect if our beliefs at least were approximately true? We would expect us to be successful as they are, whereas would we expect them under the hypothesis that they aren't approximately true, would we expect us to be as successful as we are in navigating the world and so on? And I think you could probably put it in like non-IBE terms, non-inference to the best explanation terms. But we could probably hold off on talking about.
I think we can hold off because also in this stage of the dialectic, we're responding okay, so skeptics someone claims of the skeptic, they're acting as if they know things. Mm-hmm. And the skeptic says, well, no, I'm just acting as if I believe things. That's it. We're not to the point where anybody's trying to argue that there is an external reality or that we do know things. That's going to come later. I feel like that comes later in the dialogue.
Yeah. We're going to, okay, so that's cool. We'll talk about that when we get to the IBE. And then, okay, I just had two other things I wanted to talk about just really quickly.
Closing my blinds.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Let's see.
Okay, so yeah, there were two other things I wanted to get by really quickly. Okay. One of the is at their response that they're explaining their behavior by their beliefs. I don't know, I'm still a little skeptical of that because it's like, not only do they have those lower order beliefs about, well, I believe that there's a truck coming, so that's why I'm running, but don't they still have, at least if they're reflective skeptics, they still have these higher order beliefs where they believe that they don't know it, and they believe that that belief itself is not justified, and they believe that it's equally as probable as its negation. And if they have these higher order beliefs, it seems as though we're just back at step one, where they are indeed acting as if they know these sorts of things, or like that they don't really have this lower order confidence that they say they do, because they have these higher order beliefs that are directed at them, and that they're essentially nullifying, they're negating the kind of explanatory force that their first order beliefs have with respect to their behavior. I don't know. It's just like, it's almost like no, your higher order beliefs are revealing that your first order beliefs really aren't. I don't know. It's kind of an inchoate objection.
Let me try to, let's go a little slower and flesh this out. So let's take even a skeptic who wants to live like a normal human. Okay. Now, when they're tell me this is what you're getting at, Joe. Like when they're walking around and they probably want to distinguish between some of the beliefs they're forming and the beliefs, let's say, a flat earther is forming, or a conspiracy theorist like QAnon person is forming. So they have these beliefs, and they might even form these beliefs about themselves. Like they might form beliefs about themselves in cases where like they were taken in by a conspiracy theorist theory, and then other cases where like they followed a proof very well. And very much so, like we would expect such a person to act in certain ways, like maybe treat some of the conspiracy theorists with like a negative attitude, like how dare they, and even toward themselves, like be embarrassed if they make a mistake in their reasoning. But then in other cases, they're like, oh yeah, they might feel pride in themselves for having reasoned successfully through yet another version of a cosmological argument or something. So in that case, maybe they're acting as if some of their beliefs are more justified than others, or that some of their beliefs count as knowledge, where others of them don't. I don't know. That's the sort of higher order beliefs where somebody seems to be acting and reacting as if they do have knowledge or do have more than just justified beliefs. Sorry, unjustified beliefs. Mm-hmm. Is that what you were after, maybe, or is it something a little different?
That's similar. So
okay.
What I'm thinking is like, they claim to have these lower order beliefs, right? So like they claim to have like believe that the truck is coming, but they also have these beliefs that like, because they're skeptics and when they're in their reflective mood and whatever, they positively believe that that belief itself is not justified, that presumably it's equally as likely as its negation or something like that, maybe. They have these higher order beliefs that are directed to that, which almost like, it's like, no, you're canceling out its force in explaining your behavior, because you have these higher order beliefs where it's like, no, you positively think that that lower order belief is not justified. And if so, then I don't know, it's almost like, why are you running away from it if you positively think that that's not a justified belief and that it's equally as probable as its negation or something like that? I mean, maybe what I'm really getting at is like, they're kind of violating epistemic norms, maybe. I don't know, because they claim to believe it, so that presumably they have a high degree of confidence in it, maybe. But then somehow they have higher order beliefs that that's not even justified, such that surely it's like equally probable either way. So then they should have actually 0.5, so a lower confidence, such that they don't actually believe it. So then how are they? It's almost like no, you've contradicted yourself at some point by having these higher order beliefs about the lack of justification of lower order beliefs, but yet you still retain that higher confidence in those lower beliefs, even when you know and you yourself believe that those lower order beliefs don't warrant that kind of high confidence. So it's like, I don't know, it's like they're violating maybe. They're violating epistemic norms or something. And then and if they're violating epistemic norms, like, don't they want us to like agree with them and their arguments and other sorts of things to be a skeptic or something like that? And so they're relying on these epistemic norms, and I don't know.
So have you heard of acrasia or acrasia?
Is that a weakness of will? Is that what it is?
That's right. So there are these cases where, let's say you believe, this is in the case of ethics, you believe you shouldn't do it, but you still do it. Like, even if you're wrong in that belief, there's something bad about acting in a way that's not in accord with what you believe you should do. Or let's say you believe you shouldn't do something and then you do it. Okay, now there can be epistemic acrasia, where you believe you shouldn't believe something, or you're not justified in believing something, but you still believe it anyway. So that's a epistemic acratic state. A lot of epistemologists think there's something bad about that. There's something incoherent. Actually, in my own considered view, I don't really talk about my own views that much in this talk, but in my view, that might be the main source of irrationality. When you believe P and you also believe you shouldn't believe P.
That's I think that's what I'm getting at. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, but Michael Bergmann, he calls these who's at Purdue, he calls these
boiler up.
Yeah, he calls these believed defeaters. But now people just more just call it instance of epistemic acrasia. So Joe, these are interesting thoughts. What to say? I think, I'll just put my skeptic hat right now. I might be like, I do believe I shouldn't believe P, and yet I do. And that's how I am. And I am in the state. You caught me. Maybe they'll end up being like, you kind of showed that the second Roman numeral, they act as if they know things. Can you see my mouse?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Kind of reduces to a sort of self-defeat of the first, when people say they don't know anything. Although in this case, it's, there's a different type of self-defeating, which is they're believing in a way that's not in accord with their higher order beliefs about what they should believe. Yeah. And so they might the skeptic might say, that's true. And we got him. And we can say this like as like the believers and non-skeptics, we got him. And so we might have beat the skeptic. And so, I think ultimately, one, you put your finger on something that's been discussed a lot in the last decade, epistemic acrasia. And so I think that's interesting you brought that up. And I think with this, we might have to take our discussion to, therefore, even if we've, made the skeptic trip over their feet, we still have this goal of diagnosis and goal of building epistemology.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we'll go on. I have one last thing. So I wrote down 4 things because I was very excited about this slide. This is one I was like most excited about.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote down 4 things. One of the Morian shift, we covered that one. The second one was the no miracles argument. We covered that one.
Yeah.
Third one was this kind of, what we now call epistemic acrasia sort of thing. But the fourth one, and this is the shortest one. So the fourth one was, I guess, I guess another response on behalf of the skeptic, which I'm sure you know about, is like maybe distinguishing between the positive and negative skepticism, right? So they might be able to say, oh, well, I'm not saying that, I know that I know nothing. I'm just questioning you, bro. Like I'm just saying, like, how do you know this and how do I know that? And I'm just like completely taking no stances at all. It's like a hands-off sort of thing. So it's a kind of negative skepticism. They're just like, I don't claim any way. I'm just questioning you, bro.
Yeah. So yeah. Right. So I think that's a way for the skeptic to avoid this sort of self-refutation claim. It's almost like, I'm not claiming to believe this proposition, but here,
Yeah.
You don't know anything here, and then with an argument. Right. So I hear this is a terminological point that I'm not quite sure about, but sometimes they call, I believe, the Pyrrhonian skeptic.
Yeah.
There's someone who's just withholding on everything, not even claiming to not know. They're just not making claims. So yeah. Now, in my view, I'd rather just focus on propositions and arguments and the propositions in favor of them, and kind of pull away from the skeptic, him or herself.
Yeah. And there's also that act as if thing, because they're still going to make their way around the world, and they're still going to run away from that train or whatever.
Oh, right. Yeah. But even if there were no actual living skeptics, and there are a few, but even if there were none, the epistemologists would almost like have to invent the villain so that we could create the hero.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So we covered the 4 things that I really wanted to, and now we can move on.
Okay, great. Yeah. And then I think especially your miracles argument might be relevant to what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's your standard first pass at a skeptical argument. So it's useful to talk about René Descartes and what he was living and writing in the early 1600s, and he revolutionized philosophy. And really quickly in this first Meditations, he points out how he realizes that he had believed things firmly in the past that he later learned he was wrong about. So based on this sort of track record, he started to think, maybe I might be wrong about stuff. But then he thought, well, but surely I know that I'm sitting in front of a fire right now. And but then after that, he thought, well, I could still be dreaming. So I might be in a dream, dreaming that I'm sitting in front of a fire. Okay. Now, so this kind of brings rise to other, in popular culture scenarios where we have something like a matrix. We're all plugged into this computer, just being stimulated with experiences, so that we have the simulation of the world, or we have a dream, or a dream like in Inception, which already is becoming an old movie. I think it's about like 10 years old now. In my mind, it's still like a new movie. But anyway, so it's good to like develop these skeptical possibilities into an explicit argument. So modus ponens is as good as an argument for and gets. So premise 1, we might be wrong about any of our beliefs. Premise 2, if that's true, then we don't know anything, therefore we don't know anything. Okay, now how does Descartes respond to this? He says, well, even in my dreams, at least I know that 1 + 1 = 2. So even in my dreams, like there's one thing and another thing, there's 2 things. I'm just working my way through meditation 1 right now. And then, but then he thinks, even an evil genius or an evil demon could fool me into thinking that it seems that a certain mathematical proposition is true when it's really not. So then I can't even trust my beliefs in math. So I can't trust anything. So then what does Descartes do? Descartes says, well, and this is like the big climax of that appears in Meditation 2, which is, he thinks, well, I do know that I doubt, and I do think, and even if the demon were to trick me about that, I would still be right about the fact that I'm thinking that I'm tricked, or I'm thinking that I have the thought. So, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He ends with saying, at least my beliefs about my own mental states are firm. I can't be wrong about that. I could be wrong about anything else, but not my beliefs about my thoughts, how things seem, how things feel, and so forth.
Yeah, didn't I just want to mention one thing, like, I don't think people appreciate this, but didn't Augustine beat him to the punch there? Like, didn't Augustine already run the cogito or whatever? I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure.
yeah, I actually forget. I
I'm
vaguely
pretty
remember
sure.
something about you're saying. Augustine did have a dream skeptic argument. I do know. So
I'm
he
quite confident. I believe I've read somewhere where like Augustine was like, no, I know like I would have to exist in order for the skeptic to trick me. And I'm just like, people don't give Augustine credit for this, but I'm pretty sure Augustine was like the original Descartes. But anyway, you can
yeah,
go
okay,
on.
yeah, I don't know that. So that but what you're saying does sound familiar. So
Mhm.
it's not like what's Joe talking about. Like
Yeah.
I vaguely remember what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
you can continue. Okay, I just wanted
Yeah.
to say that.
Well, I'm almost toward the end, but this was something that could be more of a discussion point, which is Descartes seemed to trust in the infallibility of at least some of his introspective beliefs. And that's been called into question by a couple arguments in the last 50, 50 years or more. So I believe Keith Lehrer has this case where, okay, so this is the way one of my professors told me the story. You find yourself like, trapped and locked up with a bunch of other prisoners. And then there's somebody going around with like a little prod, like, and they're like, everybody, like they're going, the guard is like slowly torturing each person, like, like they're all screaming. And they get to you, and then what he's doing is tickling you. Okay. But for a second, you believe that you're in pain. Why do you believe you're in pain? Because everybody else is in pain. Okay. But what you're feeling is a tickle. Okay. And so I hope I'm getting his argument right. But so he thought, with the wrong expectations, we can form false beliefs about what we're feeling. Um, so I'm generally moved by that sort of argument, and so we might even be wrong about what we're thinking, what seems to be so, and so on. Um, Let me give you one more quick before the layer scenario. I should have given this scenario, which is a lot of people, especially from the work of Eric Schwitzgebel. He has a really nice paper. I actually haven't read it, but he has a paper arguing that I just know more from
Yeah, yeah.
from like abstract and stuff, that a lot of our like emotions we don't know, like sometimes other people have to tell us like we're sad,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I have been sad, or like you've been smiling a lot today. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I've been happy. So that's true for those things, but people have been like, but things like pain, or like these like more like raw like direct feelings, Schwitzgebel doesn't, from what I know, doesn't attack those mental states. um, so yeah, so so there's one case, this tickle case, which I believe is from Lair. Yeah, so that kind of got me thinking, yeah, we might even be wrong about like our direct like experiential mental states, like right in front of us. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'll have to think about. I'm kind of skeptical of that initially because I'm just like, I'm thinking if I'm in that situation, I think that I am in pain in that initial thing. The pain is created by my own expectation of what they're gonna do, and so I almost like I make myself feel kind of pain in that anticipation, and
Yeah.
then when I recognize that I'm merely being tickled, my whole kind of psychological firings, calm down, and then they're like, oh, that's kind of pleasant or something like that. So I want to say intuitively to me, like I would be in pain, like I'm screaming and I was expecting it, and I'm like all probably like tensed up and everything, and so I want to say no, I actually am in pain there.
Wow. What do you think about have you ever smelled or tasted something where like at first you thought it tasted, oh yeah, or like even felt something, oh, this tastes hot, when it turns out, oh no, it was actually really cold.
Oh, so when I was younger, I used to touch. Okay, so in
Yeah.
the summer, like your seatbelt buckle or whatever is
Uh-huh.
like baking in the sun, and
Good.
it's super duper hot. And I remember touching it once, just like this, and I remember thinking like it almost felt like it was so hot that it almost felt cold in some sense. Like, it was
Uh-huh.
weird. People like maybe people have experienced this, but I have, and it was like
Yeah.
I was like, it's almost like it's cold.
Yeah. So the idea is there might be some experiential state E, okay, and maybe experiential state E has a quality F. So okay, call experiential state X, X has F. Or maybe it's the feeling of cold or the feeling of pain or whatever. Is it possible, like broadly, metaphysically possible for someone to have the experience of F or X having F, okay? But someone believes that X is G. Now, in terms of like logical space, it seems like conceptually possible that someone has experience. And like these sorts of like your seatbelt case or the case where you feel like the case where, well, let's just stick to the tickle pain case. You might have the experience of a pain when of a tickle, but you believe that it's pain. So long as these are conceptually distinct, it seems like the demon can get his foothold and like get you to like ascribe the wrong concept or the wrong property to the experience of saying, instead of saying X is F, I'm saying X is G. And so, yeah, so I was trying to use it with maybe motivate the intuition with thought experiments, but maybe just like conceptually we can imagine, oh, okay, those are distinct. Yeah, so what do you think?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I want to say, like, you know, we have to distinguish between a kind of conceptual distinction and whether or not they actually could be metaphysically separable, because you know, our concepts don't always track the kind of fundamental natures of things, and so in the natures of things themselves, they might not actually be metaphysically separable. Now, I know that we're in a context wherein we're talking about, do we know that you know, one could come apart from the other, but I guess I'm thinking perhaps it's just part of the very nature of an experiential state that and the part of the nature of minds, part of the nature of experiential states, and the acquaintance relation between them, perhaps it's part of the very nature of those things that can't be wrong about it, actually. There's something in there that is such that it guarantees that you're correctly latching onto it. Now, of course, when you bring in more kind of what I think philosopher Caroline Franks Davis calls like ramified beliefs, or more theoretical, more highly kind of those kind of terms that you're describing it and how you would kind of flesh it out, well, then obviously we can start to get wrong in there. But anyway, I think we can probably we could probably, you know, I'll turn over to you to comment on that one last thing that I said, but we could probably, you know, set that aside. We can start to doubt maybe Descartes' infallibilism, even with respect to our introspective beliefs, and then maybe we could talk about or maybe we can move on. So
yeah, no, I don't have much more to add. More just to say that's what Descartes thought. Now people disagree about it. I'm just going to mention for your audience, Timothy Williamson has another argument that's very influential, came out in 2000 in his book Knowledge and Its Limits. His anti-luminosity argument, for people who want to look it up, which is trying to argue that beliefs about our experiential states or introspective states, they're not going to amount to knowledge. So he has an interesting argument for that, but it's actually complicated enough that it wouldn't be easy to explain. Like you need a decent amount of formula.
yeah.
So, all right, so let's go. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, all right, Descartes, suppose you're right. Suppose you can know that you think and that you are. Well, we want to know more about the world than that. So, and so these next arguments kind of get a little more specified. So these are arguments for local skepticism, but they're still pretty radical. So premise one of the external world possibility of error argument, we might be wrong about any of our beliefs about the external world or the past. If one, then we don't know anything about the external world or the past. Therefore, we don't know anything about the external world or the past. Okay, similarly, the certainty argument, if S knows that P, then S is absolutely certain that P. Premise two, no one is ever absolutely certain of anything about the external world. So no one knows anything about the external world. So in both of these cases, they're making a claim about what knowledge requires. Knowledge requires either you can't be wrong or absolute certainty. Now, some people want to say, well, I couldn't be wrong about these things, okay? They say that, you hear this in theology context too. People want to say, yeah, do you want to be certain that God exists, for example? But when they're thinking about these things, I don't know if they're thinking about possibly being in a brain in a vat or in the matrix or in a dream or manipulated by an evil demon. So that's what's going to motivate premise two of the certainty argument. And it's what's going to motivate premise one of the external world possibility of error argument. Actually, do I go? No, I don't go. Okay, that's something. Okay, so now the standard response to these arguments is to go fallibilist. Okay, so just to say, to know something about regarding premise one, to know something about the external world of the past, your evidence for the claim doesn't have to be like 100% certain. It can just be 90% or like just very, very, very good. But it's okay if it doesn't absolutely entail the truth of your belief. So even if you might be wrong, as long as we just say it's might, then that's no big deal. Like if we should be worried about the skeptic, we would want them to show that it's probable that we're wrong, or there's a more than 20%. But all you've given us in the skeptical argument is the possibility, and that could be like 0.0001% likelihood that I'm in a dream or manipulated by an evil demon and so forth. Same for the certainty argument. No one is ever absolutely certain of anything about the external world. Suppose that's true. Well, premise one, if knowledge doesn't have to require this absolute certainty for the same reasons just given, it just requires like pretty good certainty. And that's enough to know. So that's the fallibilist response, is very common. And it's the sort of move you see regularly. So I don't think this is as much the challenging argument. The more challenging argument is to come. But any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, actually not really, because yeah, I mean, I kind of want the audience to know that, like, I'm sure you could verify this, but I'm quite confident in like about 99% of epistemologists are fallibilists, something like that. So it's probably close to that.
Yeah, I think so, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have thoughts about actually even how we're defining fallibilism, but just on the rough and ready way people talk, your evidence doesn't have to entail the truth of your belief, or doesn't require 100% certainty. We can leave it loose like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's good. I was just gonna say we're just gonna reject like the second premise on the external world one, right? It's not the case that if we might be wrong, well then we don't know it. Things like that. So I just wanted to pinpoint for the audience which premise we would reject.
Right, and then premise one of the certainty argument. Yeah. Now, if this one thing that would be nice is there's various theories of knowledge, and if we were in my epistemology class, we could like go through the various theories of knowledge, and on a lot of them, premise one of the certainty argument and premise two of the external world possibility of error argument don't come out true. So, okay, let's go to the next slide then. Okay, now this is the closure argument. You made reference to this earlier. And I'm going to explain it slowly because I notice, at least my students, like it takes some time to like get each part. So there are various closure principles. And to get you the idea of what a closure principle is, here's one. So if I know P and I know that P entails Q, then I am in a position to know Q. Okay, I was taking the wording from McGrath. There's more sophisticated versions of closure, but that we're just not going to go into them for this. Okay, now to see this clearly applying to a skeptical argument, I think it's good to take the contrapositive of closure. Contrapositive is just where you deny the, I'm saying this more for the audience, you deny the consequent here and you put it out front. So you take what's here, I am in a position, whoops, go back. I am in a position to know Q, and then put that in the antecedent if I am not in a position to know Q. And then you take this antecedent here, if I know P and I know that P entails Q, you deny this, and then you put it in the consequent here. So the denial of I know P and I know that P entails Q is either I don't know P or I don't know that P entails Q. So that's the contrapositive of closure. Okay, so there we go. So now let's work through this step by step. Okay, premise one. I'm not in a position to know that I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, so a lot of people want to say, yeah, I know that I have hands, but is whether I'm a brain in a vat, BIV, the sort of thing I can just know. Can I just know that I'm not a brain in a vat? And it seems like my evidence isn't good enough for me to be able to know that I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, so that's premise one. I'm not in a position to know that I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, Premise 2 is just a statement of the contrapositive of closure. So I'm not going to reread it again. It's just what was up here. Okay, 3. So 3 follows from 1 and 2 by modus ponens. So I'm not in a position to know that I'm not a brain or vat. If I'm not in a position to know Q, I'm not a brain or vat. Then what follows is either I don't know I have hands, or I don't know that I have hands entails I'm not a brain and a vat. And that's just modus ponens. Okay. Now, assuming we just know basic logic, I do know that I have hands entails I'm not a brain and a vat. When I first heard this argument, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. If I'm a brain in a vat, then I don't have hands. So in other words, if I do have hands, then it follows that I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, so this is the denial of one of the disjuncts here, the second disjunct. I don't know that I have hands entails I'm not a brain in a vat. I do know that I have hands entails I'm not a brain in a vat. Therefore, this other disjunct follows. I don't know that I have hands. Okay, so
yeah. Well, for the audience, quick thing. By I have hands, we mean like actual extramental objects called hands, like the tangible things, because people are thinking, well, what? Like in the brain in a vat, right? They can truly, yes, they can simulate your hands, and you think that you have hands in there, and you might even, in some sense, know that from within the simulation you have simulated hands or something like that. But when we're talking about I have hands, we mean like actual hands, like these things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good. I think that's a good clarification. Sometimes I forget like what's going to be confusing to people who aren't used to this. And clearly, if all you are is a brain in a vat, then you don't have hands. Like that's another way to think about it. Because like, look, there's just a brain right there. Okay, now the thing about this argument is sometimes I hear this from people who haven't dug into epistemology as much, which is they just want to say, oh, fallibilism's the way out. If you're a fallibilist, then you don't have a skepticism problem. And I don't think that's quite true, because with the other slides, the fallibilist could have an easy premise to deny, as we talked about. Either premise 2, to say knowledge doesn't require this, in an impossibility of error, or knowledge doesn't require absolute certainty. In this one, though, it's a little bit less clear which premise the fallibilist wants to deny. So let's see. So yeah, there's some more to say, but I'll just pause in case you have any questions. Also, generally, how are we with time?
Well, so we have been recording for about 1 hour. So I'm kind of cool to go for. I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah,
I mean,
I have. It's Saturday, so I have a decent amount of time.
So I mean, I'm thinking maybe like 30 more minutes, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I think that would fit.
Yeah.
Especially if your biggest questions were earlier.
Yeah, 30 more minutes, maybe plus or minus some, depending on where the spirit of epistemology takes us.
Yeah, probably at 2 hours. That might.
Yeah, that'll. Yeah, I'm totally agreed with you there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's the argument. I'm going to go over some possible responses. I'm going to spend a little more time on the IBE response, but yeah. Any thoughts from you, Joe?
I think we would sort of already have covered some of the things that I would say. Like I would kind of be sympathetic here to a kind of Morean shift, and also maybe the more so inference of the best explanation, or IBE, or no miracles argument. Now I do think that there are some ways that you can doubt closure, but those get kind of technical, and sometimes you can like concoct scenarios where it seems as though you can know both P and that P entails Q, or at least you can be reasonably justified in them, and yet you're not in a position to be justified in knowing Q. But I think those get a little bit technical, and that would be a little bit beyond our present inquiry.
Yeah. I might add, just for viewers' knowledge, Robert Nozick is famous for one particular way of denying closure, where you can know you have hands. Basically, deny closure in this argumental context is to say, I know that I have hands, but I'm not in a position to know whether I'm a brain in a vat. And Nozick has a theory of knowledge that gets that result, and it's independently supported. Maybe if we have time at the end, and if we're interested, we can go into it. But even if you deny closure, we should feel some tension in saying, yeah, I know that I have hands, but I don't know whether I'm a brain in a vat. Like just saying those two sentences
Yeah.
side by side feels a little weird.
Yeah, I think everyone should at least on all sides agree that there's at least some plausibility and some intuitiveness behind closure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what the hard part is, so in terms of the Moorian shift, we might tell the skeptic, hey, I'm more confident that I don't know that I have hands than that's right. I'm more confident that I know that I have hands than that the conjunction of 1 through 4 are all true. But in the purposes of building up our epistemology
Yeah.
and diagnosing where the skeptical argument goes wrong, we might want to say, okay, where does this go wrong? And I think we don't want to deny 4. I think we do know that I have hands and tails. I'm not a brain of that.
Yeah.
3 follows from 1 and 2. So we're going to have to deny either 2 closure, or we're going to have to deny 1 and say we are in a position to know that we're not a brain in a vat.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's the only quick thoughts I have at the moment. So we can go into some responses.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Okay, yeah, and this will go into your no miracles stuff, and we can dig into the IVE stuff. Okay, so I would say the main thing to attack here is going to be premise 1. Okay, so even though people like Nozick and others have attacked closure, we want to attack premise 1. Okay, and so we could, using your Moorian methodology, Joe, we could combine what's more plausible? I don't know that I have hands, or I'm not in a position to know that I'm not a brain in vat. I might have got the negations mixed up, but we might say, well, I'm more confident in 1, so maybe I should give up this premise 1. But the question is, how are we going to give it up? And there's a few ways epistemologists have suggested. So let's go to that. Okay, so am I in a position to know that I'm not in a brain in a vat? So could I know, yes, I'm not a brain in a vat? It seems a little weird to say that we could know that. And so here's one famous attempt to try to argue for this. Some people trace this to John Locke. Bertrand Russell has a really interesting argument that we can know we're not a brain in a vat, or at least be justified in believing it. And in this book by Kevin McCain, he tries heroically to try to defend this. Jonathan Vogel is probably the most famous name nowadays for arguing this. So, okay, inference to the best explanation. How does it work? You take your evidence, okay? So here's how I teach this in my intro informal logic class. You get home and you see your apartment or your house is a mess, okay? And you see some valuable jewelry missing. Supposing you have jewelry, valuables, okay? I don't really have jewelry, but okay, you see the stuff missing, and what's the reasonable thing to conclude? Probably that you were burglarized, okay? Now, there are other explanations of your evidence. For example, aliens took it, a meteor hit inside your home, a friend, not a very good friend, was playing a practical joke on you. Okay, so these are some possibilities, but what you can do is slowly start to say, the best explanation of all of this is just that I was burglarized. Okay, so why can't we use that here? So suppose Descartes is right and we can trust our experiences and our seeming, how things seems, how things feel, our introspective beliefs about how we feel. Okay, then we can argue for this sort of thing. O is going to be our observation, our data, our evidence. I have memory and perceptual experiences that are regular and orderly. Now, it's easy to overlook this. For example, okay, you guys can see what's behind me, but I can't. Okay, now I can't see it. But like for a lot of us, I might look, there's a marker over here. I might look away, and I look back, oh, it's still there. Okay, so the world that we observe, our experiences have a lot of orderliness to them. We don't have, now I don't have to assume that there is a marker here. We shouldn't right now. All we really know for sure right now is that we have the experiences we have, okay? And so, and we go, oh yeah, wow, that's very orderly. I remember there being a marker there. Oh yeah, that's there. So now if we want to be fair to the skeptic, we more just want to say, I have a memory experience of there being a marker, And then when I look, oh, now I have a perceptual experience of there being a marker. Okay, so that's what we're talking about with this regular and orderliness part here. Okay, now a good explanation of that is there's a world of enduring and relatively stable physical objects. My experiences are typically caused by these objects stimulating my sense organs. Okay, so that's going to be my explanation, similar to my explanation for my house being in shambles, which is that it was burglarized. Okay, so we have our evidence, and then we look for what the best explanation is. Now, what we got to do is rule out the other explanations, like my friends are playing a prank, or a whirlwind came through, or aliens did it. Okay. Similarly, in the skeptical argument, we want to be able to rule out other possible hypotheses, like I'm a brain in a vat, dream skepticism, evil demon. They could also explain why, like, oh, I have a memory experience of there being a marker. Oh, there it is. Now I have a perceptual one. So they match. Okay, so the evil demon and the dream, this could all be part of a dream, or the brain in a vat or matrix. They could simulate this. Okay, so so here's going to be our argument then, stated out clearly. This I'm drawing from that informal logic textbook by Fogelman and Armstrong. I'm using their like argument form for inference of the best explanation, where you start by premise one, giving your evidence or your data. Okay, I have memory and perceptual experiences that are regular and orderly. That's O. CS, which is there's a world of enduring relatively stable physical objects that are typically causing my experiences by my sense organs. Okay, CS is a good explanation of O. Okay, and no other explanation, including brain in a vat, dream skepticism, evil demon, is nearly as good an explanation of O as CS. Therefore, probably CS is true. Therefore, probably I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, and just for your viewers, for some people, you're familiar with this, is really easy. For those of you where this is your first time being introduced to IBE, inference of the best explanation, just plug in your mind, like, I see my room in shambles. Me being burglarized is a good explanation for my room in shambles. No other explanation, including prank, aliens, whatever, is nearly as good an explanation of my room being in shambles as I was burglarized. So therefore, probably I was burglarized. Therefore, well, there's nothing there. So this is, I think, a decent, good inference of best explanation to try to argue that we're not a brain, probably not a brain in a vat. Okay, one more slide, and then we can discuss whether this is good. So it's good to talk about what are explanatory virtues. And this is good because I think even in metaphysics, people care a lot about like good explanatory virtues. So we want our explanation to have explanatory power to actually like explain the things it's supposed to do, like a burglary would do that. We want explanatory depth. We don't want our explanation to just lead to more questions. Like, for example, like, let's say my explanation was going back to the room burglary case. Oh, my friends played a prank, but that's going to lead to more things that need explaining. Like, why would my friends be such jerks? And we will need more things explained. Simplicity, it doesn't claim more than is needed to explain the observations. This is kind of like an Occam's razor. So I might just say I was burglarized. I wouldn't say I was burglarized by exactly 10 people. Lastly, we want our explanation to be conservative. It doesn't conflict with other things we know. Let's say I know that whirlwinds don't leave rooms in shambles where they only take the jewels or the valuables. Okay, so now what we want to do is ask ourselves, is premise 3 true? So I think we agree premise 2 is true. CS, the common sense explanation, is a good explanation of our observations. But is it actually that much better than the brain in a vat, dream skepticism, evil demon? Well, I think the dream skeptic has a little bit of a problem arguing, like explaining why my observations are so orderly. But a brain in a vat simulation or an evil demon does a little better by that. Okay, but brain in a vat, you still have to posit the existence of an external world. So you still have a lot of stuff, just like the common sense does. So you might say, well, brain in a vat, but you also need this added complication of like a scientist who is able to put people in vats, and it seems to be a little, more complicated. So maybe it's not doing so well simplicity wise. But evil demon, that's pretty good. Evil demon, you only need one being, one creature to simulate all of my experience. Just one demon who is intent on deceiving me. And then you go to the common sense explanation. You go, wow, that's really not that simple, because I need an earth, I need like an environment, I need like a universe, that like a galaxy that supports life. Wow, there's a lot of like baggage I need for the common sense explanation. I need like organs and like all these nerves that are gonna make it to my brain to give me these experiences. Whereas a demon, evil demon, is so nice and simple of an explanation. Um, so, all right. So I'm just giving a pass at like maybe this argument doesn't work after all. Any thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, okay, many. Let's see where to start. So the evil demon hypothesis, that seems as though it's going to be significantly harmed by its lack of explanatory depth, right? So it has so many ad hoc or seemingly ad hoc postulates that you have to talk about, like the preference structure of this evil demon. Why would they desire to make it seem as though I have a red experience here, blue experience there, that
Right.
experience here, that experience there. So now it's not just this single demon. Now we're talking about his desire structure, his preference structure,
Right.
his choices, and all these other sorts of things. And like for every concrete object you're talking about in the external world for CS, you have to have a corresponding desire or corresponding intention of the demon to simulate that and make it seem as though that's occurring to me, and so on. So
Very good.
I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, like, it doesn't seem like, I don't know, you have all these intentions, all these desires, all these choices for seemingly no reason. Like, why is the demon doing this? Like, what's going on? Like, there are all these sorts of questions that this raises. It's not at all clear that it's simpler, because you have, for every concrete object here, you have a corresponding desire and intention and willing, and then the somehow the will is efficacious, and other sorts of things. So when you
Yeah.
dig more into this explanation, it seems as though it starts to fall apart.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Good. So that's a good, excellent move there. And so then it seems to be what we might get is like kind of like an isomorphic, like you can line up for, I like the way you put it, for any object I see, there's the demon having an intention for me to experience that object, right? Um, Now, that's true. But then here's the thing about inferences to the best explanation. Suppose the evil demon scenario has as much lack of simplicity or lack of explanatory depth as CS does. Then they get put on a par. And for a good inference to the best explanation, you need no other explanation to be nearly as good. Here's why. Like, suppose I come home and then like I have two roughly similar explanations and they're about some, then I should suspend judgment. I can't infer that one was the correct explanation. Even if one is slightly better, like I'm a detective and it's only slightly more likely, like the evidence slightly explains one culprit rather than another. It's not enough for me to justifiably believe that it was this one culprit. At best, I'm going to think maybe there one slightly better than the other. Now, if that's true, then let's say I'm playing the skeptic, I might have led you in a trap. Okay, suppose they are isomorphic, like they do just map up like that. Well, you're not going to get this conclusion probably CS is true because the explanations are roughly equal. Okay, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, are they really equal? So
Okay.
it seems to me that uh, the evil demon hypothesis still has, it's just so, there's so much arbitrariness and unexplained aspects to it. Like, why does this demon have this in particular intention? Why are they doing this? Why aren't they making it seem as though it's disorderly? I mean, presumably, if the evil demon can make it seem as though it's orderly, it can also make it seem as though things are totally chaotic and disorderly and other sorts of things. Like, why does it have these particular desires it does? Why does it have these motivations it does? Why does, I don't know, it just seems to be, there are so many kind of primitives. There are so many like brute posits, it seems to me, about this demon's like preference structure, desire structure, willings and intentions and other sorts of things. And there seem to be so many posits and arbitrariness that it's just like, this is nowhere near as good as an explanation of just the common sense one.
Yeah. Okay, so suppose we need an explanation for all these. Now, you might just unify a lot of these individual intentions with one evil demon intent on deceiving me.
Yeah, but then you're starting to lose your explanatory power. That's no longer going to be able to predict all these particular experiences, whereas CS would. So there's a trade-off.
Yeah. Oh, then I wonder. Okay, because we also need to explain all those individual objects too, right? Like,
yeah, but I think
the
we have
marker and my plant back there, and or right there, and so forth. Yeah,
but I think we do have like non-arbitrary, non-primitive explanations for those. We could talk about this causal network and this causal framework of reality, and one thing leading to another, and I don't know, that we can come to intelligible stopping points. Whereas for the evil demon one, it's just like he just desires it. He just intends it, and then he wills it, and he's just deceiving me, and I'm the only thing. Why are there no other things? Why is there one demon instead of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or infinitely many? Like, I don't know. So, I mean, I do think that I might ultimately think that this kind of inference to the best explanation kind of argument might concede too much to the skeptic. I do kind of fear that ultimately, just because there are so many parallel moves that I do kind of fear. Because they can get a phenomenologically indistinguishable hypothesis, and like you were talking about, there's an isomorphism. I do ultimately think that they have more primitives and arbitrariness, but I'm not sure that that's how I want to ground my knowledge, that there's like an external world, and like relying on the arbitrariness and primitiveness of these other hypotheses. And presumably, like I'm thinking about maybe an argument from unconceived alternatives in the philosophy of science. Like maybe there are unconceived alternative skeptical hypotheses that don't have such arbitrariness and don't have such primitives that I simply don't know about, but that were I to know about them, they would have equal ontological or equal explanatory power and simplicity and so on. So I'm still kind of just like, you know, I'm still not really left with a win against the skeptic, it seems.
Right. So yeah, even if all your points made through, like were successful, in defense of this argument, it might still be too frail of a read to base your knowledge.
Well, and like a normal person, I don't know, I kind of think about like normal people and they're going about their day. It's like, how do you know that there's this table? Well, let me tell you about IBE and some explanatory like theoretical virtues and compare it to all the hypotheses. Like, that's not how people, I mean, I almost feel like should we think that our epistemology kind of tracks how people know the sorts of things? Like, you know, like no one goes through this kind of reasoning except like philosophers who are in the ivory tower. So like, is this really how we come to know that there's an external world or something, or what? Like, is this how we justify it? Or I don't know. I feel like it should kind of maybe track actual practice maybe. And maybe that's why we should rely on a kind of externalist approach or something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, so, okay, so now I have a bunch of thoughts on what you said. Yeah, so there's a few. I should have written some stuff down. Your earlier point about there might be other explanations we haven't thought of is a good one. Matt McGrath points that out in his chapter. And that's entirely reasonable. I mean, like, it takes some work to think of these sorts of hypotheses.
Yeah.
And it also has to be that the CS explanation, you want it to be better than the disjunction.
The disjunction. That's going to be hard.
Hypotheses, right. You don't want it to be just better than the best one, because then you might still end up being under like 50%.
Yeah.
So that's one problem, and I agree with you about that. Yeah. So now there is another question, like how inference of the best explanation should best be done. You might say that some people think inference of the best explanation for a person, what a person is individually justified in believing, is only dependent on the explanations that are available to them. And that's what Kevin McCain pushes in his book, because insofar as we're just talking about justified belief. And so it might be that for the average person, the common sense world hypothesis is the best explanation relative to the hypotheses they have. Okay. But so maybe they're justified in believing there's an external world.
So you've harmed me by introducing me to all these other alternatives.
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's gonna suck once they watch The Matrix. Just like think a little bit. Some people call this, I think, planning on. Maybe some others like you come to know less by knowing more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and now, so that's, but Kevin McCain like heroically tries to defend this IBE argument in his book, and I'll be plugging this book later. Michael Bergmann has a book on skepticism coming out soon. I know it's done; it just has to be published, where he responds to Kevin and other people trying to argue that this IBE argument's not going to work. Another concern might be, you might be concerned about how much we can trust IBE. Like,
Yeah.
I tend to think part of the reason why I trust IBE is because it has a good track record, but we might not be able to know that IBE has a good track record.
That was another one of my, okay, so that was similar to one of my other criticisms.
Yeah.
One of my other criticisms was like, the skeptic might not even grant that how do you know that these are the explanatory virtues? Like, how do you know that? Like, how do you know that simplicity is a good guide? How do you know that these things, like, conservative, like the skeptic's gonna be like, screw that. Like, how do you know that? Like, you won't be able to apply to IBE to know those things without, bootstrapping yourself up into knowledge. So
those are concerns. Now, some the non-skeptics defending this might say we just know a priori, like we can see these relations, and that these best explanation relations between propositions have inferentially justifying support, necessary support relations. But yeah, that's requiring a lot more knowledge again. And maybe we can't have that. Another concern about this sort of argument is, so the one paper I've written on skepticism is on skepticism and memory. And here's the thing that also sucks, which is, as you're doing this process, you need to rely on your memory to remember your earlier premises, remember, like, oh, did I consider that other hypothesis? Did I already rule out BIV, brain in a vat? Did I rule? And then you're like, well, did you rule that out? Like, and then, you can have a memory, but all you got experientially in one time slice is not very much. So the poor epistemologists who only want to rely on present experiences, I think sometimes they forget about memory and they want to sneak in past experiences too. Oh, I had this other experience. Even in my marker example, I had myself like, okay, I have a memory experience of there being a marker. Okay, now there is a marker. Suppose I successfully do that. Okay, now what? And now I just have to have one experience left over again. But that's not enough to build on. Like, I can't build on like this whole set of experiences that I would like to. I can only have like a few experiences that I can like keep track of at a time. Okay, a last thought is, this is something I haven't explored that much, but I kind of have wondered what's more, if we're working on inference of best explanation, just positing an evil demon, and the people arguing for like an evil god hypothesis. I've kind of wondered, like, hey, how do I compare an evil demon hypothesis with like an evil god hypothesis, and even just a theistic explanation, and then just like a naturalist explanation? Because you said like the explanations have to stop somewhere, I mean, this is where metaphysics kind of meets epistemology, because we're going to have to like stop our explanations too. We're going to have to stop with God, or just some necessary being that's not God, or just like no necessary being. So we're going to have to posit these unexplained parts of our theory. But yeah, I don't know if philosophy, religion, and metaphysics gets into this as much, but so I was just thinking out loud there. So
yeah, no, I like it. I mean, I also are seeing lots of connections here, so it's really interesting. And Descartes like famously tried to like bring in God into it,
right?
But that wasn't really successful. But
yeah, but very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. That's something that Augustine probably didn't do, maybe. So maybe that's where Descartes gets credit. Now, obviously, Augustine was a theist. I'm just saying, Augustine. I don't know if Augustine like got God to the rescue and is like, I know this because of God.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep pushing on. But I think the IBE explanation is the one that, like, I feel like in terms of like making a skeptic feel like they were taken seriously, IBE does that the most. Like these other responses, Moria shifts, I think a lot of times they feel like even for me as a non-skeptic, I walk away feeling like, I wish it would have worked. So, okay. Oh, we already did that. Okay, so there's other responses I'm gonna mention. Oh, you added some
I
to.
did add some, yeah, because
Okay.
I wanted to talk about those a little bit.
Okay, sure. So let's talk about maybe the Moorian shift, okay, and the confidence thing. So let's revisit that. Um, all right. Now, here's one way to put it. I'm more confident that the conclusion is false than all the premises are true. And in this case, since we want to keep like premise 4, we want to like keep, I can know that having hands and tails, I'm not a brain in a vat. Like we want to keep that for sure. So um, I would want to more just say I'm more confident that I know that I have hands than that I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat. Okay, if I want to use that more in shift strategy. Okay. Now, the concern about confidences is I think we all agree that confidences can be unjustified or irrational. So we want our confidences to be justified and rational. So now what's going to matter is what's the evidence supporting our confidence and the evidence supporting my confidence that something is true. Well, so in this case, we have my confidence that I have hands and that I know I have hands. What's that going to be supported by? That's going to be supported by my evidence that I have hands. Okay. What's my confidence that I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat? Well, it's hard to know what the evidence for that's going to be. Now, here's one way to run the Moorian shift. Here's one strategy. Bergmann has another one. One strategy is to say, well, I have good evidence that I have hands. Therefore, I do have hands, and I know that I have hands. Run the closure principle backwards, and therefore I know that I'm not a brain in a vat. So that's one way to go. Concern about that, though, is the core. Matt McGrath points this out. I think others have. The core evidence I'm relying on is my experiential evidence. Like it seems that I have hands, or in my experiential seeming, perceptual seeming that I have hands, using phenomenal conservatism, I guess. Okay. But does that, it's reasonable to think that seeming would justify believing I have hands, but that seeming doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that will justify believing I'm not a brain in a vat. It seems like it's outstripping its evidential power. So that'd be the concern with the Moorian shift and I guess phenomenal conservatism. Okay, am I making sense here? My evidence ultimately comes down to the experience, but how does this seemings experience, how does that justify my believing I'm not a brain in a vat? You can use the closure principle, but Matt McGrath says it's kind of like magic. Like, where did you get this extra epistemic boost?
That's interesting. Well, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, you kind of anticipated what I was going to say. I was just going to say, like, well, listen, you just start with your seeming, and then you get to the I know that I have hands, and then you just, use the closure principle, and
Right.
voila, like boom, like just did it. So I don't know. I feel like I guess the closure principle is the kind of bridge by which you go from what does seem to be, within the power of phenomenal conservatism to what doesn't initially seem to be within the power of phenomenal conservatism, and you just kind of have a bridge to that. And because the skeptic's own argument relies on it, or at least this abstract set of propositions relies on it, it seems as though we can rely on it as well. Now, I know I'm very focused dialectically, so I know, so maybe I keep on going back to that, but yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud again, so I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, let me push the intuition even more. So this is a very common example. I think it goes to Fred Dretsky. You're walking at the zoo and you're like, oh, there's some nice zebras. Okay. You're like, oh, and you keep on walking. Have you heard this, the zebras case?
Is it? Oh, go on.
Oh yeah. So then, and then somebody raises the that it's actually what happened. The zebras were ill, but they needed the zebras out there for the children, so they just painted with white and black stripes their donkeys and mules. Okay, and they go, yeah. So and you go, well, I saw zebras, and if they're zebras, then they're not just donkeys with stripes on them. Therefore, they're not donkeys with stripes on them. Okay. Now, something seems bad about that, right? It seems like you're outstripping your initial evidence. You had the experiential state, but it seems like you're going farther than you're allowed to do. So that's a more realistic one that doesn't bring in like crazy brain in a vat scenarios. So I'm trying to push Does that help like make it seem a little more convincing?
I'm a little skeptical.
Okay.
I'm a little skeptical. So, you kind of brought in it was almost like I don't know if I want to say it's a ramified, but really what they saw, they saw things, they saw animal-shaped objects that are white and black. That's what they saw.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm not sure if they can say that they saw, if we're talking about only what seemed to them,
Yeah.
they would have to add some other kind of like ramified theoretical beliefs about what those objects typically are that are shaped like animals and painted that way, or that are like that look that way. And so maybe it's the seeming in conjunction with those theoretical beliefs that is seeming that seems to be outstripping the capacities of the seeming. But it's not the seeming itself. It's like you're bringing in these other ramified beliefs, and that's what's helping you get this extra boost. But when you don't do that, you're no longer able to get that kind of apply the closure principle to the seemings in order to somehow magically conclude that they aren't just painted white and black. I don't know. It's hard for me to articulate it, but
Yeah. Well, one concern I have is, do you think you uh, initially wouldn't be justified in believing those are zebras?
well, now we're getting into like memory, and because it's like your past experience, like because
Oh, okay. Sorry.
typically,
So let me more specify. Take a normal case where you go to the zoo. You're walking by the zebra pen or like area, and you don't know much about zebras. And so, strictly speaking, you don't know how to distinguish zebras from striped painted mules. But that's thoughts never occur to you. You're just an ordinary guy, and you go, "Oh yeah, there's some zebras," and you go home, and then somebody asks like, "Hey, were there zebras at the zoo?" Yeah, you go, "Yeah, there were." Seems like in an ordinary case, you would know that there's zebras at the zoo, based on your experiences and the background beliefs you have.
yeah. I mean, I would say because you don't have like well, you're justified. You don't have a further defeater. You have the seeming, and it is indeed true, or something like that,
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah.
there's an explanatory connection between. Anyway, now we're getting to like now we're getting to externalism. But go on, go on.
Well, yeah. So suppose you're already justified, and suppose you grant knowledge in that case. Okay. Now imagine. Now, well, actually, no. Let's just continue on that case, and then the person just asks you a just an innocent question. Um, so, from your knowledge that there were zebras, do you think you can infer that they weren't mules with, well, like white, black, striped painted mules? Uh, do you think you can infer that? What would you say? Uh,
Uh,
and you realize that like you don't really know how to distinguish a striped mule from a or donkey from a, yeah.
um. Well, I think it would depend on many factors. Like, are we including that I have like generally when I see things that are painted this way that normally they are indeed actual zebras. Do I because that's a very far-fetched scenario. Its prior probability is very low. My prior for this other thing is high, and then even though if the expectability on the hypotheses is the same, the prior could still justify me in accepting that it's the zebra, and then I'm going to say, yeah, of course I know that because I ran this Bayesian analysis or other sorts of things. So I don't know. I think there are just many different ways I could go about responding to this, and
I see.
I mean I get where you're going for. Like, it does seem maybe in some sense that the seeming is outstripping. You're using your seeming to justify something that outstrips the initial seeming, maybe.
That's that's the core of the problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
Despite the funniness of the details of the case.
yeah. Well, I'll have to reflect on that further. It's just I feel like there are so many working parts here that it's hard for me to come to a, it's hard for me to come to a conclusion right now. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
There's other cases you're like, there's other barn cases, but you're walking by a barn and you go, oh yeah,
yeah.
that's,
Fake barn county. I love that
but
one.
it's normally used as a Gettier case. In this case, somebody just asks you, hey, do you know that it wasn't a fake barn facade? And you'd be like, oh, I don't know. Like, but the evidence just doesn't go that far. Um, okay, well, so that's the one concern about the morning shift, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, I would say don't put it just in terms of confidence, but put in terms of like how your evidence supports that confidence.
Okay, yeah.
And then, well, that's my suggestion. But
Mhm.
then maybe you might have a problem there. Okay. Um, okay. Okay, maybe we'll go to this. So this reading response, and this is the view that Bergman's going to defend in his forthcoming book, which is Bergman, when it comes down to it, believes that it can be properly basic when you believe that you're not a brain in a vat. Properly basic means it's non-inferentially justified. Now, how? The way he does it is in a way that's compatible with phenomenal conservatism. So when you consider a brain in a vat style case, well, like you'll have a seeming that like, well, that's crazy, right? That I'm a brain in a vat. So the seeming can justify that you're not a brain in a vat. That's the gist. He spends a whole book defending this. But yeah, you could just say, to make it more straightforward, we don't even have to appeal to Seeming's or Bergman's specific way. He draws this from Reed and just say we can know directly that we're not brains in vats. Okay, now how might this go? You could go either externalist or phenomenal conservative. Okay, you can go externalist by just saying, yeah, a reliable belief forming process produces in me the belief that I'm not a brain in a vat. That's still going to be compatible with a properly basic way. Or you could just say a seeming that I'm not a brain in a vat. But that's, okay, it's going to seem a little funny though, but that's still going to be evidence supporting your belief that you're not a brain in a vat.
It is a little weird to say that it seems that I'm not a brain in a vat. Like maybe, because we have to distinguish between, I see this mistake so often that someone says, it seems that not P, when really it just doesn't seem that P. And those are different, right? It seems to me that it's different to say that it seems to me that there are no germs on this counter or this desk versus I simply don't have a positive seeming that there are germs here, right? It's kind of like, yeah, well, there's that difference. And so I'm wondering if is it really just I don't have a seeming that I'm a brain in a vat versus I positively seem not to be a brain in a vat, Yeah.
Yeah. So right now I'm kind of exploring logical space. I just feel with Bergman, I don't want to go too far just because the book's still forthcoming.
Yeah.
And so maybe that should still be held back.
We could do that.
Now the externalist way might be a little better. So what I mentioned earlier is what matters is that, okay, we've been putting everything in terms of evidence, right? So we want justified confidence that you're not a brain in a vat. And the justification can come from other factors, like the belief, your confidence being formed by a reliable process. And that's what makes you justified in believing you're not a brain in a vat. Yeah. So
okay, so for the audience, I guess we should say, because some people might not know what externalism and internalism
that's
is.
right. Yeah.
So I'll let you define them.
Okay. Yeah. With respect to what makes a belief justified, the internalist will say only mental properties are relevant to determining what makes your belief justified. So things like seemings, your experiences, your other beliefs, and so forth. Okay. For an externalist, what makes a belief justified? Well, Alvin Goldman, the classic externalist, probably the most influential one, he asks, well, let's distinguish our justified beliefs from our unjustified ones. So my belief that I have hands, justified. My belief that my favorite NBA team will win, not justified because it's based on wishful thinking. And then so he starts, well, what makes the difference between the two? Well, my belief that I have hands is formed by a very reliable process, a visual process. My belief that my favorite NBA team will win is based on wishful thinking, not a very reliable process. And then he thought, okay, so what makes a belief justified? It's really just what's the manner, the process that produced the belief. Mm-hmm. And those factors might not be factors that are within your conscious experience, which is normally or within your mind, which is normally,
you might not be aware of them, like consciously aware.
Right. So if on the basis of wishful thinking, it seems to me that my favorite NBA team will win and so forth. But if it, in fact, it's produced by a wishful thinking mechanism that I don't even know about, Goldman and the reliabilists would say that belief's not justified.
Yeah, okay. And there are lots of different externalist views, there's reliabilism, as you were just pointing out. Yeah. There are also some interesting causal views and explanatory views, like believing something because it's true, or at least believing something because it's true in some where the explanatory connection is some kind of relevant or something like the relevant or correct kind. It's hard to get an analysis of that, but like, oftentimes they take that to avoid a kind of accidentality condition that's often present in Gettier cases, where you just accidentally have the true belief, even though you have this other kind of justification. Whereas if you're explanatorily connected to the truth, such that you believe it because it's true, you might be able to get around these sorts of things. And that seems to be a kind of externalist approach, because at least part of your quote unquote justification is the explanatory relation that actually obtains between the fact and your believing that fact. Yeah. I'm just giving people the lay of the land of some of different like externalist approaches.
Yeah, right. And so a version of the view you just talked about is defended by Thomas Mogardus.
Yeah, their recent paper, I believe it's just called "Knowledge is Believing Something Because It's True" or something like that.
Yeah. But they had enormous problems with induction. So somehow I know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. But the fact that the sun rises tomorrow doesn't explain my belief that the sun will. I talked with them about this, and they try to handle it in the paper. Anyway, that's where the debate would lie.
And I also have some worries for that. Like, I don't know, it's like some general facts. It doesn't seem as though they could have any like explanatory, like the belief that generally the world is explicable, or like generally states of affairs have explanations. Like, it's unclear to me that these general kinds of facts explain our beliefs about them, like in some way, because I don't know, they're like perfectly general. They don't like of themselves have any causal or explanatory connections to things. So, I don't know, I kind of worry about that. And I also have some worries about some certain like potential counterexample. I don't know. It's like, what if someone has a pill and they really want you to like, they know they have like this deductive proof, say like this super complex Gödelian ontological argument that God exists or something, and they're like absolutely certain, and they know, and like, so they have perfect knowledge of it. And so they have this pill that they give someone, and they want them to they manufacture the pill. They know that the pill will give the person a belief that God exists, and like, let's say they themselves believe it because God exists. Maybe God gave them the ontological argument or something, so they themselves believe it because God exists, and they have that belief, and that belief leads them to create this pill and give it to someone. So then that person, and this pill is such that it gives you like 10,000 beliefs, 9,999 of them are wrong and just completely BS or something like that. And then one of them is that God exists. And so then you take and this is like slipped in the pill, and maybe like all the beliefs are triggered like 20 years in the future or something, and they don't even know that they took the pill, and they don't know why they took the pill, and it was just like slipped into their drink or something. And so there is a chain of explanation here that explains why they come to believe eventually that God exists. And the ultimate explanation is because God does indeed exist, so they believe it because it's true. But like, they don't have knowledge here. I mean, they were slipped a pill, and like 20 years later, it's like, I don't know. I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think it's a problem for the explanationist view. I would imagine Bogardus and Perrin would have something to say about this, but yeah, I mean, you're going to have to restrict the chain in some way, and I'm not sure how they're going to do it.
That's going to be hard,
so,
yeah.
Yeah,
it's going to be real hard.
Yeah. Also, knowledge of generalizations, knowledge of math, and those tend to be hard to like.
Yeah, they have this like direct acquaintance relation, which is like it's a little spooky. Like with abstract objects, it's like, what?
Yeah, when I read this, when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I can.
That's part of the paper where I was just like, I'm not sure, you guys. Like, this is a bit spooky, but okay.
Yeah. Now, I think it's a little more reasonable to think that a necessary condition for knowledge is you know that P only if there's some explanatory connection.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to get out of Gettier problems.
Yeah. Well. Oh, so anyway,
a good necessary condition for getting out of them. Yeah.
Some of them.
It's anyway.
But anyway, so back to this. So there's a lot of externalist theories. I tend to like proper functionalism. There's also popular now is safety theory, sensitivity theory. And they can use these to try to say they're justified in believing that we know that we're not brains in vats. Mm-hmm. And so those are ways to go. Mm-hmm. One thing about it though is oftentimes they just don't feel very satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of annoying when I've told some of my like friends, just when they ask about like skepticism and other sorts of things, and they're not really like super into philosophy, they're sometimes curious, and I'm like, well, there's this thing called externalism, and they're like that's completely unsatisfying. Like, you're telling me that like I know this thing, although like I'm not aware of my knowing it, and like I don't actually have like a good response to the skeptic that I am actually aware of, and other sorts of things. So I'm like, yep.
Yeah.
I'm like, sorry, just deal with it. It's an external fact.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's some of the main responses to this. Now, I didn't mention the contextualist view.
Yeah, I guess we could. That could just be the thing that we end on for the last maybe like 2 minutes or so, if you want.
Okay. Um, did I bring it here? Oh yeah. Keith DeRose is the guy to read on this, and Keith DeRose has this book, The Appearance of Ignorance. It came out only a few years ago, but he's been writing on this for decades, and the book contains chapters that are based on papers that were, I think his first application of contextualism to skepticism was in 1995. So here's what the contextualist points out. Some words are context sensitive, but in very, I guess, methodical ways or in orderly ways. So take the word tall. If I say, let's go back to the zoo, okay, and the elephant is with a bunch of like rabbits and squirrels and so, but it's a baby elephant. And I say, oh, that elephant is tall, okay, okay. Later on in the day, they move the animals around. Now it's the baby elephant with mama and papa elephant in the family, and then I go, oh, that elephant's not tall. Okay. Now, in both cases, it seems that my sentences were true claims. I asserted true sentences. What we want to say then is, if we want to say they're both true and avoid a contradiction, we should just say that my sentences are actually expressing different propositions in the different utterances. So in the one context, I'm just saying, by saying the elephant's tall, I'm saying it's taller than a certain standard, maybe. But in the other case, I'm saying, by saying it's not tall, I'm saying it doesn't reach a certain standard. But the standard changed depending on the context. Okay, now suppose I am with, just some friends hanging out, and somebody goes, hey, do you know whether you have hands? So I think of a better one, but I go, yeah, they're right here. Okay, fine, great, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Later on, I'm having a discussion with the skeptic, and they got me all worried about brains and bats and stuff. And they go, yeah, so do you think you have hands? Or do you, and I go, oh no, I don't know that. I mean, because I don't know whether I'm a brain or a bat. Okay. And then they go, hey, you contradicted yourself. Like earlier when you were with your family, you said you knew you had hands. I go, well, there's a way out of this. I mean different things by the word knows in the two different contexts. In the one, I only need to meet a certain evidential standard to know that I have hands. But in the other context, I need to meet this ultra high standard, one that rules out, one that includes being able to know I'm not a brain in a vat. But I don't meet it there. But it's okay. So here's how we respond to the skeptic. We can still know that we have hands. Okay, so we still keep our ordinary knowledge. We just don't have knowledge, or we can't make true knowledge ascriptions in these other contexts. So what it does is it keeps our ordinary talk okay, but it also makes sense of our intuition that we don't have knowledge in these skeptical contexts. It's all just an illusion because of our language problem. All right, so there's my quick explanation of the contextualist view.
Yeah, and I'll just make a quick comment, or maybe a couple quick comments on it. I guess one thing is like, I guess they might owe us an account of like, okay, well then what do we mean in these different contexts, and in what sense is it appropriate then to say that we do actually, after all, know in the non-skeptical context? Because in this other context, like if we're meaning something by know, and then the other one we're meaning something much more like practical and mundane, we might start to think like, do we actually really know in like the non-skeptical context? Like I guess they kind of owe us an account of what the meanings are, given that there is a different meaning in these contexts. And then I'll say one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to you for the final word. And then this one other thing is just that burdens of justification and evidential standards vary by context, right? So like in a mathematical journal and in mathematical contexts, like it's pretty safe to say like we don't know that the Goldbach conjecture is true because we don't have a mathematical proof. We need that like rigorous demonstration from like mathematical first principles. But like, and I guess in like a more ordinary context, like, you know, in our everyday context, we might be able to say like, listen, I think we have like, what is it, like millions of examples of it, or like it might be tens of millions, and they've all turned out to confirm it. And so like, just like speaking in terms of evidential confirmation, we have good reason to think that it's actually true, just because we have like millions upon millions upon millions of examples, and that would be surprising if it weren't true. But that's obviously not like the mathematical proof. And so in a mathematical context, we might say like we don't, as a society, as a species, we don't know whether or not it's true. But in another context, we might say, well, actually, we have really good reason, and we
Yeah.
might actually come to know it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So in that little part you just said, it was unclear whether you're accepting the contextualist claim or not. So what is
Yeah.
here is standards of evidence for like what we'll accept, or like what you can use changes, like when you're in a court or in a trial, or when you're just trying to justify something to your friend. Standard of evidence does change, but that's different from the question of whether
Terminology.
the
Yeah.
word knows actually has a sensitivity to it in the
Mhm.
systematic way that a word like tall does. It's something that linguists can study, I guess. Um,
Yeah, that's a good
so
distinction. Yeah.
yeah, so and I'm not sure whether you were on board or not of whether the standards for knowledge are actually the evidential standards for knowledge are actually changing.
Yeah, I don't know either. I was just I wasn't, I was a little sloppy in my presentation. I shouldn't have said no there. I just wanted to get people aware of like standards for evidence and standards for justification. Those do in fact change. So it's not like a super crazy view that incorporates that as an essential element. So that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, that happens especially like in philosophy or religion conversations where people are like, prove to me that God does exist or God doesn't exist. They like prove, but like they say it with a little bit of an extra like, you're like, oh, it's like, whoa, wait, like, why do I need that much proof? And let's lower our standards a little bit. So, yeah. So some people don't like about this sort of discussion is it seems to turn epistemology into philosophy of language.
Mm.
Uh, and actually, DeRose has a book before this one, which is all before this book, The Case for Contextualism, which is the whole book is devoted to just the philosophy of language side of how the word knows works, how the standards
Yeah,
changes from context to
that's what I was talking about, owing us an account. So it does seem
yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah. So he does his homework. He does his work, like he does his due diligence. But yeah, but some epistemologists are like, I don't know, this is what I really valued about epistemology. So yeah, so there we go with that.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Andrew, for coming on and talking to us about skepticism. Do you have any like last like words in the last like 20 seconds of what you're gonna say? Any last comments?
Audience, I know that if you're watching this, you probably like metaphysics a lot. I just hope that this has kind of won you over to some interesting things in epistemology, because it's such an important and fun topic. So that's all. And thanks again for Joe for having me on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I hope it was very enlightening for me and hopefully for the audience as well. So what better way to end is there than? I'm Joe Schmid. This is The Majesty of Reason, and peace out.